Ladies and gentlemen, before I begin, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been in bed at night, your body tired, but your mind wide awake, replaying something someone said or something you did 5 years ago? Have you ever felt stuck, mentally, like your brain is running in circles, trying to solve something that already happened or hasn't even happened yet? If your answer is yes, then you, my friend, are not alone. Today, I invite you to walk with me into the mind, your mind, because this isn't just a talk. This is a mirror. This is a chance to understand why your thoughts feel louder than your heartbeat and how psychology reveals what's really going on beneath that noise. Let's begin. Overthinking. It sounds harmless, even intelligent. After all, thinking deeply means you're smart, right? You care. You analyze. You reflect. But let's be clear. Overthinking isn't deep thinking. It isn't problem solving. And it definitely isn't control. It's mental exhaustion masked as awareness. Psychologically speaking, overthinking is the act of dwelling on mistakes, failures, rejections, past conversations, future what-ifs, all with zero resolution. It's a storm inside the mind where no real progress is made, only noise, tension, and emotional fatigue. So what's really happening? Your brain is trying to protect you. Yes, that's the shocking part. The human brain is wired to avoid pain. So it replays what hurt you to try to learn from it. It predicts the future to try to control it. But when those thoughts start looping without solution, your brain is no longer helping you. It's trapping you. And it usually traps you in two directions. The past, where guilt, regret, and shame live. And the future, where anxiety, fear, and perfectionism take over. But let me ask, how many times have you overthought something and still made the same decision? How many times did the answer come from thinking more or from finally letting go? That's the hard truth. Overthinking feels productive, but it isn't. It feels safe, but it delays healing. It gives the illusion of control, but really it's just fear in disguise. Psychologists call this rumination. It's a cognitive distortion, an unhealthy mental loop that leads to anxiety, low self-esteem, and sometimes even depression. It's when your mind is too loud to listen to your heart. But here's something beautiful. The moment you become aware, the cycle starts to break. Awareness is the first step to freedom. So next time you catch yourself thinking the same thought again and again, pause. Ask yourself, am I solving or just spinning? Am I being mindful or just afraid? Because thinking deeply is a strength, but overthinking, that's your mind begging you to slow down, to breathe, and to trust that not everything needs an answer right now. Ladies and gentlemen, overthinking isn't who you are. It's just something your brain learned to do, so you could survive. But now it's time to live. Have you ever wondered why, even when you desperately want to stop overthinking, you just can't? Why your mind keeps dragging you back to the same thought over and over again, like an invisible string pulling you into a loop you never asked for. That's not coincidence. That's not weakness. That is psychology in motion. Overthinking isn't just a bad habit. It becomes an addiction. And like any addiction, it offers something you secretly crave: control, certainty, and temporary emotional relief. Let's dive deeper into how this works. The human brain is designed to seek patterns and avoid pain. It doesn't like the unknown. It doesn't like emotional risks. So when something goes wrong or might go wrong, your mind tries to control the situation by mentally rehearsing it, analyzing it, and preparing for every possible outcome. It's your brain's version of armor. It thinks, if I can just think about it hard enough, I won't feel pain. I won't be caught off guard again. But here's the twist. Just like people get addicted to substances to numb emotional pain, we can also get addicted to thinking as a way to numb feeling. Thinking becomes your escape. It gives you a sense of being in charge of your emotions, even when the emotions themselves are overwhelming. You convince yourself, if I just think it through one more time, maybe it'll finally make sense. Maybe the pain will stop. Maybe I'll get closure. Maybe I'll prevent the worst from happening. And in that moment, your brain rewards you with a chemical, dopamine. Yes, the same dopamine that addicts chase in alcohol, drugs, or even social media. When you start solving a problem in your head, even if it's imaginary, your brain gives you a small dopamine hit. You feel like you're doing something productive. You feel like you're in control. And so, without even realizing it, you go back for more. The loop begins. Overthinking then becomes your mind's way of coping. But it's also a way of avoiding. You avoid action. You avoid feeling. You avoid risk. Because to take a step forward might mean you'll have to face rejection or failure or discomfort. Thinking about something feels safer than doing something about it. For example, instead of confronting someone who hurt you, you overthink every word they said. Instead of going after your dream, you overthink all the ways it could fail. Instead of opening your heart again, you overthink the possibility of getting hurt. That's not intelligence. That's fear wrapped in logic. And this pattern of fear-feeding thought and thought-feeding fear creates a neurological feedback loop. The more you think, the more anxious you feel. The more anxious you feel, the more you think. And the cycle continues until overthinking becomes your default mode of existence. Here's something even deeper. Many people who are addicted to overthinking were never taught how to feel their emotions safely. As children, maybe they were told, "Don't cry, you're too sensitive," or "just move on." So instead of learning to feel, they learn to think. Instead of sitting with grief, they analyze it. Instead of expressing anger, they intellectualize it. Thought became their shield, but also their prison. And once your mind learns that pattern, it's hard to unlearn. It feels familiar. It feels safe. That's why letting go becomes so difficult. You're not just letting go of a thought. You're letting go of a coping mechanism. You're letting go of the illusion that you can control what hurt you. But addiction always comes at a cost. And the cost of overthinking is high. It robs you of peace. It steals your time. It drains your energy. It makes simple decisions feel heavy. It keeps your body in a state of stress and your spirit in a state of restlessness. You're awake but not alive. You're thinking but not living. The truth is, overthinking is less about intelligence and more about fear. It's less about being careful and more about being wounded. And understanding that, truly understanding it, is the first step toward healing. Because once you realize that your mind isn't the enemy, but simply a scared protector, you can begin to speak to it differently. You can begin to let go, not just of thoughts, but of the fear that keeps them alive. And that's where freedom begins. Overthinking often comes dressed as logic, but in reality, it's driven by emotion, specifically by fear. Fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of repeating past mistakes. At the heart of most overthinking lies an unhealed emotional wound, something unresolved that keeps pulling the mind into loops of what-ifs and if-onlys. But here's where psychology offers powerful insight. Our brains are hardwired to seek safety more than happiness. That means even if a thought is painful, if it feels familiar, the brain clings to it because it interprets familiarity as safe. This is why so many people stay stuck in overthinking. Not because they enjoy the pain, but because the pain feels predictable. Predictability, to the mind, feels like protection. And so we obsess over conversations that already happened. We replay scenarios that we can't change. We try to predict outcomes that aren't in our control. Not because we're irrational, but because our nervous system is trying to protect us from future pain, even if that means reliving the past 1,000 times. Think of it like this. Your mind is trying to build an emotional seatbelt. It believes that if you think enough, plan enough, prepare enough, you won't get hurt again. But the irony is that this mental preparation often becomes a very source of emotional suffering. You're not avoiding pain. You're living in it constantly through thought. There's a psychological term for this: intolerance of uncertainty. Many overthinkers struggle with the unknown. They want closure for everything: relationships, decisions, actions. But closure doesn't always come from answers. It comes from acceptance. And that's the part most overthinkers resist. They don't want to accept what happened. They want to understand it so thoroughly that it no longer hurts. But the truth is, some things cannot be understood fully. They can only be released. Another reason people get trapped in overthinking is perfectionism. The belief that there is one perfect decision, one right thing to say, one flawless way to act. So they think and think and think waiting for the perfect moment or the perfect clarity that never arrives. The result? Inaction, missed opportunities, self-doubt, emotional fatigue, all because they confuse over-preparation with wisdom. But the human experience is not meant to be perfect. It's meant to be felt. Mistakes are part of learning. Uncertainty is part of growth. And letting go is not failure. It's freedom. Here's another hidden truth about overthinking. It often disguises itself as responsibility. People believe that by thinking more, they're being responsible. They're being cautious. They're being thoughtful. But in reality, they're avoiding. They're delaying. They're escaping the discomfort of action. True responsibility is not about thinking endlessly. It's about choosing consciously, even when the outcome is unclear. And sometimes, overthinking is a learned behavior from trauma. If someone grew up in a chaotic environment, they might have learned to mentally scan every situation, try control it, try and predict it, because unpredictability once meant danger. So now, as an adult, they don't feel safe unless they've mentally prepared for every scenario. That's not overthinking, it's survival. But the past doesn't have to keep writing your present. Healing from overthinking requires more than just stopping the thoughts. It requires gently asking yourself, what am I really afraid of? What am I trying to protect? Often, the real answers are emotional, not logical. You may fear abandonment, or judgment, or simply making the wrong choice. And that's okay. You're human, but awareness is power. Once you become aware of the emotion driving the thought, you can start to work with it instead of against it, because thoughts are just messengers. And overthinking is just your mind saying, I'm scared, I want to feel safe. The way forward isn't to think harder, it's to feel safer. That means building emotional trust with yourself. That means learning to tolerate the discomfort of not knowing. That means telling your mind, even if I don't have all the answers, I'll be okay. When you do that consistently, something powerful begins to happen. The mind softens, the thoughts quiet down, the fear loses its grip. And in that stillness, a new voice emerges, not of panic, but of peace. And that voice doesn't overthink. It simply knows. The human brain craves closure. It's a natural desire to find a reason, a meaning, an ending that makes everything make sense. But closure isn't something we're always given. And for the overthinker, that's a nightmare. Because when there are no answers, the mind creates its own stories. And those stories, they rarely bring peace. You might start replaying an argument over and over, wondering if you said something wrong. Or you might obsess over why someone left without giving a reason, filling in the blanks with painful possibilities. This mental loop isn't a flaw in your personality. It's how your brain is wired to resolve ambiguity. But here's the paradox. The more you search for perfect understanding, the further you get from emotional peace. Psychologically, this is tied to the concept of cognitive dissonance, that uncomfortable mental state when your brain holds two conflicting thoughts. For example, I thought I mattered to them versus they walked away without explanation. Your mind can't handle both being true, so it goes to work. It analyzes, reanalyzes, rewrites history, imagines new endings, all in a desperate attempt to make the pain logical, because pain without logic feels unbearable. But the truth is, not everything in life is logical. Not every person who hurt you will admit it. Not every ending will come with a satisfying reason. And not every wound will have a clean explanation. The problem is, overthinkers tie their healing to understanding. They believe, if I can just figure out why this happened, I'll feel better. But healing is not found in the answer. It's found in the acceptance that some answers may never come. This is where emotional maturity begins. When you stop demanding clarity from a situation that's already closed. When you realize that some people ghost you not because you failed, but because they weren't emotionally available. That some decisions won't ever feel 100% right or wrong. And that your peace doesn't depend on solving the puzzle, but on putting it down. One of the hardest truths to accept is that overthinking is often a way to stay connected to something that's already gone. It's how the mind tries to keep a story alive, hoping for a better ending. But this is dangerous because you start living more in memory than in reality. You begin to choose the pain of what was over the possibility of what could be. And sometimes, the story you're holding on to isn't even real anymore. It's an outdated version of a person, a dream, or a hope. But because you never got closure, you keep trying to rewrite it. You keep thinking, maybe if I had said this instead, or maybe I misunderstood everything. But the real question is, why are you still giving so much energy to something that gave you none? This is where psychology introduces the idea of emotional responsibility. The understanding that, yes, people might hurt you, but it's your responsibility to decide how long you bleed. Overthinking is like scratching a wound to see if it still hurts. And it always does, because you're not giving it time or space to heal. Instead of looking for closure through thought, start looking for closure through action. That might mean setting a boundary. That might mean deleting a message you keep rereading. That might mean admitting to yourself that even if you never understand why they did what they did, you can still move forward. There's a kind of peace that comes from choosing to stop searching. A powerful shift happens when you say, I may never get the apology I deserved. I may never know why they left, but I'm not waiting anymore. I'm not holding my life hostage to unanswered questions, because closure isn't something you always get from others. Sometimes it's something you give to yourself. And once you realize that, the grip of overthinking begins to loosen. The past loses its power. And slowly, thought by thought, you begin to live again, not in what could have been, but in what is. Not in the pain of the question, but in the strength of your choice to let it go. We live in a time where our thoughts never get a break. Every quiet moment is interrupted by notifications, social media comparisons, and the pressure to always be doing more, knowing more, becoming more. This constant input keeps your brain in survival mode, racing, reacting, analyzing. And somewhere in this chaos, overthinking thrives. Most people believe overthinking is about being careful or analytical, but in truth, it's a survival mechanism. It's your brain trying to protect you from uncertainty, embarrassment, rejection, or failure. You overthink because your nervous system is dysregulated. Your mind doesn't feel safe letting go, because letting go feels like losing control. So instead, you grip tightly to every thought, hoping to find certainty where there is none. This is why overthinking is so exhausting. It's not just mental, it's physical. Your heart races, your chest tightens, your muscles stay tense, your sleep suffers, your digestion changes, all because your brain thinks there's danger that must be figured out. But the danger is often not real. It's imagined. It's a conversation that never happened, a future that hasn't come, a fear that's been magnified by rumination. Neuroscience explains this well. When you overthink, your brain's prefrontal cortex becomes hyperactive, trying to plan, solve, and predict everything. Meanwhile, your amygdala, the fear center, gets triggered and dumps stress hormones into your body. This cycle keeps looping until you either burn out or break down. It becomes your default setting. Think more, feel less, stay alert. But healing begins when you learn to interrupt this pattern. Not with more thinking, but with presence. Overthinking cannot survive in the now. The moment you become fully present through breath, stillness, or focused attention, you begin to deactivate the stress loop. You train your nervous system to relax. You teach your brain that it's okay not to have all the answers. This is where emotional intelligence starts to grow, not from being perfect, but from being grounded in awareness. You start asking different questions. Instead of what if something goes wrong, you ask, what can I do right now that's within my control? Instead of replaying the worst case scenario, you ask, is this thought helping me or hurting me? These small shifts change everything because they bring the power back to you. You stop being a slave to your thoughts and start becoming their observer. This practice isn't about ignoring your thoughts. It's about not letting them control you. When you overthink, every thought feels urgent and important, but most of them are just mental noise. Learning to pause, breathe, and wait before reacting is a superpower. It gives you space. It gives you clarity. It reminds you that not every thought deserves your energy. You also begin to realize that peace isn't found in having all the answers. Peace is found in choosing what to focus on. Your energy is limited. Your attention is valuable. And every moment you spend trapped in a thought that leads nowhere, You lose a piece of yourself to something you can't change. That's not wisdom. That's self-abandonment. True mental strength is built when you prioritize peace over control, when you stop seeking constant reassurance, when you learn to sit with discomfort without letting it consume you, when you accept that your mind is loud, but you don't have to listen to every word it says. You'll still have anxious thoughts. You'll still feel the pull to overanalyze, but you'll also have tools. Tools like journaling to release instead of recycle. Tools like breath work to regulate your nervous system. Tools like setting boundaries with your own mind. This thought has visited me enough. It's not welcome anymore. The more you practice this, the more trust you build with yourself. You realize you can handle uncertainty. You realize you don't need to prepare for every outcome to survive. And you realize that real strength doesn't come from being in control of everything. It comes from knowing how to return to your center when everything feels out of control. Overthinking may have protected you once, but now it's holding you back. It's not making you more prepared. It's making you more paralyzed. You deserve a mind that works with you, not against you. And that begins with the daily decision to break the cycle, to reclaim your calm, and to believe that even in the absence of answers, you are still safe. So, what have we truly uncovered today? That overthinking is not a flaw. It's a habit, a survival response, a mental loop built on fear, uncertainty, and a deep craving for control. But the mind that overthinks is not broken. It's simply overwhelmed, overstimulated, and undertrained in the art of stillness. We explored how our thoughts become prisons when we tie healing to explanations, how unresolved emotions disguise themselves as analysis, and how silence, not answers, often leads to real peace. We learned that closure doesn't always come from others. It must be created from within. And most of all, we discovered that your brain will always do what it's been taught until you teach it something new. The goal is not to eliminate all overthinking. That's unrealistic. The goal is to recognize when you're spiraling, pause, and consciously choose a better path. Whether it's breath, journaling, setting boundaries, or simply whispering to yourself, I don't need to know everything to move forward. That is where your power lives. That is where your healing begins. Because at the end of the day, it's not the thoughts that define your peace. It's what you decide to do with them. So ask yourself now, not tomorrow, not next week. Are you ready to let go of what never gave you clarity and finally give yourself the permission to choose peace? The answers may not always come, but the choice to live, to breathe, to move forward, that's yours. Always has been, and now it's time to take it.